Welcome. Glad to have you all with us. Feel free to introduce yourself there in the chat. Like I said, we are likely to have more joining in as we get going here this morning. I'm just going to go through a couple of slides just to kind of orient us on where we are. This is our quarterly corporate convening. So welcome to our fabulous corporate folks who are joining in with us today. Just as a reminder about what the Greater Austin STEM ecosystem is all about. We're all about fostering these collaborations across our networks and across our systems so that we can ensure STEM is accessible to all throughout our Greater Austin area. And that's a similar mission and vision as to the other ecosystems in our state and across the country as well. Our vision is that all those learners out there have that opportunity to get those STEM skills and head into those STEM jobs if that's what they choose. And that all of us that are working in these spaces, all educators in all kinds of ways that you think about educating are able to do that work with the tools and support that they need. Just a couple of reminders on save the dates, and these are all on our ecosystem events site, so you can sign up for these now. On July 29th, we have our STEM Professional Development Day that concludes with a networking forum. So join in with us on that day for all kinds of STEM fun. More to come on that soon. And on October 21st is our last networking forum for the year from 4 to 5:30. That will also be on Zoom. All of this is still on Zoom for the rest of this year. Fall and spring programming will be the focus of that, networking forum. And then our corporate convenings, our next one's on August 11th, and then our final one for the year is on November 10th. So watch your emails for that. We also have kicked off action teams. So these are the action teams that we have in the mix right now. So if any of these are interest to you to join in on, let us know and we can get you plugged in. These are working on these specific themes and areas of interest for those that are in the STEM spaces. So some good work that's happening within those areas. And just a final reminder, I'm assuming that all of you signed up for today so that you found the Zoom link to be here. But if for some reason you did not sign up on the Eventbrite, make sure that you go to our events page and sign up so that you can get all the follow-on information from today's meeting. We'll send it out to the list that had registered. So be sure that you do that. That registration for today's event is open till like 11 or something this morning. And we'll, like I said earlier, we'll get this recorded and up on our ecosystem YouTube channel in case anyone needs to access it later or share it. So with that, back to the agenda. Tracy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, good morning, everybody, on this gloomy Tuesday. Thank you all for joining. And again, as people come on, if you'll go in the chat and just name and where you're from. Special welcome to our guests. Let me give you 2 seconds of background. I am the corporate lead on the greater STEM ecosystem. And so being a retired executive, my interest is to make sure we connect the dots between what we needed as corporations and how STEM can get the helping hand it needs. So obviously this has been a different 18 months, and the legislature, we had the opportunity to make a big difference. And so instead of going after strictly educational bills and STEM bills, the first most obvious thing that we did is go after and partner with Texas 2036 and a variety of other key players on broadband and getting ubiquitous broadband. So we've had a great success there. We'll have Luis Acuna, who's the policy advisor on that topic, speak to us. Great depth of information. So that was our top priority. And then behind that, the other thing that came to me as a business person was we have to be able to tie STEM requirements to our economy. And so we have recently been able to engage with AIM Hire, and that is also a bill that has been recently come to fruition. And so they'll speak a little bit about how that works. Lastly, what we hope to do is really speak to a call to action. Let me backtrack. We do have our lobbyist from DC, thrilled to have Austin Hall here as well. He'll speak to all the federal funding we have coming. And what's going to be really critical, and a call to action for the corporations, will be how do we make sure that that federal funding does represent the priorities that we have. STEM, out of school, things that will help the pipeline. be homegrown here out of Texas. So that's our agenda today. We've got some fabulous speakers. The depth of knowledge is just amazing. And with that, I will hand it over to Luis to kick off and tell you about the broadband bill, House Bill 5, and not only what happened, but what we need to be looking forward toward in the future, especially from a corporate perspective. So Luis, welcome. And I'll let you go ahead and throw up your slides.
Great. Well, thanks, Tracy. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for having us here today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to go through the slides. So bear with me one second. Perfect. So as Tracy mentioned, my name is Luis Acuna. I'm a policy advisor here at Texas 2036 and also the lead organizer of a coalition made up of 40 different organizations that we call Digital Texas. Our mission is simple here at Digital Texas is we want to ensure that all Texans have equitable access to reliable and affordable broadband and digital connectivity. We see this as a means to an end to advancing people's quality of life and economic prosperity. With the help of Tracy and Austin, we were able to organize and get 40 plus organizations on board for our efforts here. And it's not just one sector, but a cross-sector group of organizations. So people coming from the health space, people coming from the economic development space and education space, all coming together to advance broadband ubiquity forward and also digital connectivity for all Texans. As Tracy mentioned, the big legislation that we were really focusing on was House Bill 5. And the reason being is we recognize really quick, and Austin can speak to this, is Texas was not organized for success. There was plenty of states out there that really leveraged their CARES Act funding back in March of 2020 to start providing broadband all across their entire state. But Texas was one of 6 states, now 5, that didn't have a statewide broadband plan. And we were also, there's also 3/4 of states out there that do have a broadband office. So if a quarterback in the state to quarterbacking all of the broadband efforts in Texas, if you will. So that's what House Bill 5 gets to. It ensures that we're organized for success here in Texas by putting 4 different initiatives. One, it creates a broadband office within the comptroller's office with the board of advisors. It allows us to have a strategic plan, which is going to be a long-term broadband plan with goals and a regional approach to developing this broadband plan. And it's going to allow us to now start collecting data so we can identify where are our gaps when it comes to coverage within our specifically unserved areas within the state. So that's meaning who doesn't have broadband, who doesn't have the infrastructure there. It's going to allow us to look under the hood and see where are wires connecting communities. And then the last thing it does, it creates a funding program. So this is going to be our mechanism to dish out grants or loans for broadband development projects here. And as I mentioned, this is going to allow us to capitalize on the hundreds of millions of dollars that are coming from the federal government that Austin will be able to update us on here shortly. But one big pot of money that I think the state is really focusing on heavily is the $484 million from the American Rescue Plan Act. These are funds that the governor's office will be able to apply for. However, we do need to have some plan in place already to distribute out these funds. There's also state and local recovery funds that are coming here to the state. And I think that will be taken care of in a special session. And mind you, this is going to be on top of the American Job Plan funds, which are the infrastructure bill that's being currently debated in Congress right now. So this is a once in a lifetime investment of funds that are coming here to Texas. And that's why House Bill 5 was important, to make sure that we had the proper mechanisms in place to make sure that Texas was best suited to distribute out those funds. So our next steps now after this bill has passed, well, one, it needs to get signed by the governor, but I have no doubt that it'll be signed by the governor here shortly. The next steps that we really want to focus on is engaging a group of organizations for developing the broadband office and developing a strategic plan, the broadband plan. We want to make sure everyone's at the table and that it's led by communities working alongside the internet service providers to make sure that we're actually achieving our goal and achieving broadband ubiquity, and also digital connectivity, meaning people are skilled enough to use this internet and use the technology to better improve their lives. We want to be monitoring the appointments of the Broadband Board of Advisors. I think this is going to be really critical in terms of who's on that board and who's making those decisions on behalf of the entire state. So we want to make sure we have the right board members in place. The other thing we're going to do is engage in the administrative rulemaking. This is where implementation comes in, and making sure that the bill that's set up for these structures, the rules that we're going to engage by, is going to be benefiting communities to achieve, as we keep saying, broadband ubiquity here. And of course, we're going to be tracking the federal funds that are coming down. We've already seen some guidance released from the U.S. Treasury, but there's still guidance pending for those 484 million that I was mentioning. And we want to make sure that we have an idea in place and are advising the governor and comptroller on how we need to use these funds, because there's going to be a special session coming up that we know is going to be a huge debate on federal funding. And we want to make sure that broadband is at the forefront of that discussion, so we can make sure we're connecting all of our communities here. And here are some other bills that passed. It wasn't just House Bill 5 that passed. I think this was the best session for broadband and digital connectivity in Texas's history. We saw some efforts advancing digital inclusion. So this is where digital literacy and skilling comes in. We were able to broaden some of the workforce development programs at the Texas Workforce Commission, some of that funding there, and also funding to libraries. We were able to expand that to include digital training and digital literacy there. We saw some online initiatives to help advance student connectivity. There's about 398 million that's going to be going to help out connect those students that are left online, or also providing technical assistance to schools to help make sure that those kids are brought online here. There was a big initiative within telehealth, making sure that those same efforts, or the same emergency rules that we put in place during the pandemic are stayed in place to make sure that we can achieve access to health through telehealth visitation. And we also saw some great efforts made here to loosen up some of the restrictions and regulatory barriers for middle mile access. And so now this is providing certain electric utilities to start providing middle mile access to broadband, which should achieve our efforts in reaching broadband ubiquity here in Texas. With that, I'll conclude my presentation, and happy to answer any questions if that's allowed, Tracy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if you also have any short-term questions and short-term direction as to what a call to action will be down the road. Maybe when we come back in August and the special session is set to make sure some of these priorities happen. Aha, there you go.
Well, I think I'll go back to this slide, and the big effort here, I think, is going to be making sure that we have a statewide broadband plan that is actually a plan and not just a paperweight, and that this is going to be guiding policies and decisions that are made at our state capitol. So we want to make sure that within Digital Texas, or anyone that has any ideas, is coming to the table to make sure that this is being crafted from a community level, working alongside the internet service provider. So I think that's key step number one. We're working internally within Digital Texas to figure out how we get organized in that effort. And so we'll be reaching out there. And I think the other big thing that'll come into play too is if anyone's aware of any projects or have ideas on projects on how to reach broadband ubiquity here in Texas, is going to be huge, because we need to make sure that the governor and the comptroller are aware of these projects, since Texas doesn't have a plan or anything to go based off of.
Are there any questions out there? And Luis, what is the timing that we think? Obviously, we can always input immediately onto the state broadband plan, or recommendations or support of advisors as that moves forward. But is there a timing in the bill that you can share with people about when the first draft of that broadband bill will be out for review or commentary?
So the plan, when the governor signs the bill, that's when the clock starts ticking. We'll have 12 months from the time it's signed to get that plan in place. But I believe they're still developing who's going to be the broadband office director, all that stuff. So I think I don't have any specific timelines right now in terms of what we'll see things, but I'm anticipating some stuff in the fall is going to be playing out.
So I anticipate as a community, and this is the extended Greater Austin, Alamo, and Texas, as August comes around, we will be sharing with you how that's fleshing out, and stay very close to our corporate leaders, whether it's major corporations or our smaller businesses here in Austin, to see where you're connected in the state, and that we are meeting your requirements with any suggestions that you have. So thanks, Louise. That was excellent. And I think that additional list of all the impactful legislation supporting broadband was great.
Okay. Thanks, Tracy.
Last call as Lee puts up his slides and AIM Texas comes on for any outstanding questions. Okay. And Lee, I don't know if you're going to do a handoff with Chris. I'll also introduce Lee Jackson, who is the director of AIM, and he'll explain how that fits in and the legislation that happened. And Chris Walters was Texas 2036, and he will also talk a little bit, I believe, around the bill.
I will hand off to Chris. Thanks very much to both of you. You are a policy-focused group, and so is AIM Hire Texas. So, of course, is Texas 2036, and we're glad that you've joined as a partner of ours, along with IBM, whose Sherry is also on this call. I want to give you a little background about our founding and goals before I hand it over to Chris. So these were our original 7 partners last summer in 2020. And we are focused really on using data, better data, to drive policy and fill the gap. And we've done this in parallel with Luis in broadband. I would say it's parallel, but completely independently. So we were recruiting businesses, institutions of higher education, economic development groups, companies, philanthropists that knew there was a need for workforce improvement. It's a little different from broadband in that obviously, the state already has some focus on education planning and on workforce. It's just not as coordinated as we think it could be. You're all familiar with this slide. We talk about it a lot, how poorly Texas rates in the percentage of its adult population with a post-secondary credential. Texas 2036 uses some peer states based on size and economic competition that we can then do our data set and compare, and we're last in that percentage. So we know we have a ways to go. We know we've depended on migrant labor in a lot of cases, talented, skilled people from around the world and particularly around the United States. That pattern of domestic migration has been uneven. It declined in 2015 and 16, 17. I think it's going to be back up this year. But long run, we want to serve our own residents. If we serve talent in Texas, then of course there'll still be migration, but we'll have done our job helping people get not only degrees, which is the most traditional measure, but other certifications that are now available. So I wanted to show you some of the data that Boston Consulting helped us gather, trying to look at what are the issues. Well, one of them is that these new certificates, credentials of all types, in fact, have short-term timelines. They have wage impacts that can be measured. This little slide is complicated, but it shows these STEM field certificates.
We're not seeing the slides.
What?
Sorry about that.
Uh-oh. Well, I hit share screen before I came. Okay, wait a minute. Let me go back and share the screen again. How we do? Are you seeing it yet?
Yes.
All right. Well, now I got to get from the current slide. Okay. You see
There we go.
Yep.
Gosh, you just missed all my great slides. But fortunately, this is the meat of it. What I'm pointing out is that these non-degree certificates can now begin to be measured for their wage impact. And in high wage STEM fields, a 3 to 6 month certificate in some cases, or a short-term program has long-term better wages. This in the right column shows these are 10-year median wages from certificate holders versus some bachelor's degrees that obviously were not designed to be necessarily high wage degrees. So that doesn't mean degrees aren't valuable. It means that we've got to start measuring these non-degree credentials. And in some cases, for some students of low income, for example, it makes a lot of sense to get a certificate first or while you're getting an associate's degree and then go on rather than try to wait 4, 5, 6, 8 years. We've also begun to gather data. This is from the Heart of Texas Waco Workforce Board, showing that there are a lot of people working in jobs in Texas now in entry-level positions that require a high school diploma that can get to a living wage without a college degree. And mapping out those pathways for every job family is so there's a need for broader planning, just like Luis talked about in broadband. We spend $70 billion in education and workforce, but it's done quite a bit in silos. There's not a unified set of goals. There's not an agreement on how to measure living wages or self-sufficiency wages. And so we've asked the same sort of focus be brought to workforce planning by the state. And it's been more complicated because there's already a tri-agency initiative. The Texas Education Agency is already focused on this issue, which is about how we don't rank very well in how we use the massive federal funding for career and technical education at the high school level. Again, we rank at the bottom of our peers in how many of these high school students get an industry recognized credential, much less whether it's they then go to work in the field for which they have had funded training. Same thing with apprentices. We don't talk about apprenticeships in Texas. That's for electricians, plumbers, and welders. We haven't looked at it broadening it. We haven't modernized it. We have a very small percentage of our labor force who's been a part of an organized apprentice. They're now IT related apprenticeships, finance apprenticeships, healthcare apprenticeships around the country being formed. We need to get on this bandwagon and use apprentice potential. So these are the AIM Hire Texas goals. They're very similar. You'll notice we start with organizing for success. It's a principle in pretty much everything we do. Not to say that the current agencies aren't doing a good job, but are we measuring results? Are we just meeting compliance standards, minimum federal standards? So these are our 6 big drivers. We have a lot of data that now can help us break this out into regions. You know, this is showing how different regions of the state have disruption from technology. We have wages by job family, and we measure the gaps against what exists now in supply versus the projected growth demand. And we can do that also by region. We can look at these gaps by job family. And again, for STEM interested parties, you'll see at the top of this, along with healthcare and finance, STEM dominates most of the biggest critical supply and demand talent gaps in Texas. We think in many cases, these are going to be changed jobs. It's not like everyone's going to lose their job. They're going to have to reskill, and reskilling is a big deal. It's a tough time for employers. It's even tougher for people of color to access these living wage jobs. So that's a priority of ours. If we can meet our goals, it'll have a multi-billion-dollar impact on household earnings in Texas. And so we have 4 goals for our coalition. More Texans earning a living wage, more equitable sharing of that prosperity, faster filling of talent jobs, and that the state uses talent as an attractive feature, and so that people expand their business or come here, not in spite of our talent gaps, but because of our talent strength. And we have some regional planning. This was just a sample Boston Consulting did, and it happens to be based on Austin, showing how a workforce planning goal using the very best data will differ from region to region, comparing Austin to the Panhandle and the mix of jobs and what needs to then be driven by local coalitions and collaborations and workforce boards. So with that, I want to turn this over to Chris Walters to talk about a bill. We do have in place a support bill. We didn't have to start from scratch like in broadband. We have the tri-agency initiative that exists only by the governor's letter. And we felt it was important to give structure to that. And as soon as the governor signs this bill, we think we'll be starting down a path of better planning. Chris, to you.
Great. Well, thank you, Lee, and thanks everybody for having us. My name is Chris Walters. I'm a policy analyst at Texas 2036. And I'm going to talk about HB 3767, which is our big AIM Hire workforce omnibus bill. It was carried by Representative Jim Murphy from Houston and Paul Betancourt from also from Houston, both Republicans.
Hey, Chris, let Lee move the slide forward so we can see. I think you put a slide in there. Lee, can you? No?
This should be
it? Oh, this is it. I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure we're on we're going through a lot of slides, so thank you.
No worries.
Apologize.
Yeah, we're going in light speed, sort of. So
we're on the right one.
One more slide, and then we'll be done.
This is the right one. I just was trying to make sure for everybody's watching, they could connect the dots.
Got it. So the basic idea with this bill is trying to translate as many great findings from that BCG work, from that AIM Hire work, into actual law. Trying to align our K-12, higher education, and workforce systems to make sure they're all working towards the same goals, and using good data, tracking student outcomes, along the metrics that really matter, whether students are getting good jobs. So we're kind of breaking it up into three parts. The first is the Triagency Workforce Initiative, which was an initiative started by the governor in 2016, which it's not currently in statute. It was just a letter that he sent to the Texas Education Agency, the Higher Education Coordinating Board, and the Texas Workforce Commission, basically telling them, y'all need to play nice, y'all need to work together. It's been a really beneficial effort, and we want to formalize that and really empower that work. So in this bill, we require these three agencies to come to interagency agreements around resources, data, and staffing. We require them to set statewide workforce goals and then shared strategies across the state, and then also within each workforce region. And then we also require them to come up with a definition for, we're calling it self-sufficient wages. Lee called it living wage, basically the same thing. What we really want the state of Texas to do is raise the bar in what we consider to be good jobs, that these jobs can't just be in demand from the employer's perspective, but they actually need to, from the employee perspective, help them to cover their basic costs without government assistance. The second kind of big category is around data modernization. So we're requiring the agencies to come up with a strategic plan to unify their data, to help link it across from K-12 to higher ed to workforce, so we can really track student outcomes across systems, acknowledging that this is sort of a continuous pipeline to the workforce. We're also asking the coordinating board to improve their student success data. That a ton of data in Texas is collected. Not all of it is reported. We're just asking that the coordinating board report on all the data that they collect regarding student outcomes. And then last, we are asking the Workforce Commission to create a voluntary pilot program with employers to improve workforce data collection in Texas. So of all of kind of K-12 higher ed and workforce data systems in Texas, our workforce data is furthest behind, I would say. And so the idea here is to try to get it up to speed quickly and figure out sort of what works, what's important, and so we can take those findings into practice in later sessions. And then lastly, around funding, this bill requires that agencies, where they can, braid and align funding. So meaning that if they're pursuing similar goals or similar strategies or programs, that they combine funds and try to be as efficient as possible. Excuse me, my allergies. Second is around increased transparency regarding program funding, making sure we understand where funds are going to which programs, what's working, what isn't. And then lastly, this bill doesn't cost any money. It's contingent on federal funds being allocated or gifts and donations. And so that first tier will be implemented. And then the second tier, the data modernization, can be implemented based on the availability of funding. So those are sort of our three tenets. Next steps will be, continuing this work, especially around the data modernization, to make sure our data resources are, 21st century tools, accessible to students, employers, employees, and really record what matters most. And that is, our students, our Texans, getting good jobs and filling our workforce needs sort of now and then decades from now. So I'm happy to answer any questions y'all have, both about aim higher for Lee or about this bill for me.
Chris, you commented that the Triagency Workforce Initiative is funded through federal funding. So when Austin comes on, Austin, maybe you'll have a couple comments on if there's actions we have as corporate leaders to try to redirect funding to make sure that happens. But how does this play out time-wise? Who's going to have that oversight? So ultimately, and maybe all the answers aren't there, but that our leadership, our corporate leaders will know maybe how best to impact it with the guidance from you and Lee as we go forward.
Yeah.
Is there going to be a handful of people that, we can make calls on and chat with, et cetera, from that perspective, the impact?
Chris, let me speak to that. One of the differences in this area versus broadband is because of the loss of federal funds, there was a great awareness of the need for a better broadband plan. Here we have a different challenge. We have 3 agencies that are already working together. They say they're working together pretty well, and I think that's true, and they're good people. But that also becomes a part of the status quo. They have procedures in place to improve their own data internally on 3 very different platforms, to review their web portals, to start new partnerships. So what we faced in discussing this bill was they were willing to support the initiative and the recognition and the statutory authorization, but they didn't want new deadlines. They didn't want a lot of new mandates, because they said, look, we already have a lot in the works. And to your point, Tracy, the coordinating board in particular went out last year and got a pretty good chunk of the first wave of stimulus funding for their internal data improvement. And so they've said, really, for driving a planning schedule, let us meet and let us work on it. We're going to be suggesting elements that we would like to see considered in the plan and asking them for some kind of response. They've pretty much worked in private, except for 2 broad goal statements they've made that are very general. We're going to be asking them to look at things like a credential library, expanding the skills analysis process to a broader range of job families, focusing specifically on work-based learning opportunities, whether apprenticeships, internships, and setting some targets. So I think in answer to your question, we hope to give suggestions as soon as possible about ways that additional federal funding or future state funding could be prioritized. But we're having to tread carefully with these 3 agencies that already have substantial resources and don't want us to come in and just be critical. They want us to partner, and we will try to do that, partner with a push. And so we would ask for your help and have letters on those priorities by this fall. That would be my goal. This bill will go into effect. They will start having a more serious discussion about what a comprehensive plan looks like. And we'd like to say, we hope you'll consider these elements in your planning and in your request for a piece of stimulus funding. And that comes a little bit late to really get ahead of the curve in tying down this funding, but I have a feeling we can still have an impact.
Excellent. That was a really good explanation. So I haven't heard any questions yet. Please, somebody jump in, just talk over me if there are questions. Lee and you covered a ton of information. And I know there's already been questions about sharing the slides. Everybody, all these slides will be available. And I'm guessing as this evolves, we probably need just a meeting with Aim Hire, assuming you're willing to really kind of deep dive some of the work that you are doing and how it evolves. I would offer to the people on the phone call, when the slides come out, if you have questions and if there's enough of them, yeah, happy to organize with Lee and Hans and Chris any other further conversation for us to have.
Thank you. We look forward to it. There's one slide I didn't have time to stick in here, but I want to make this point so that everyone understands it. Particularly in Austin, you have Tesla coming. You have a lot of things happening that support a high wage, STEM focused economic growth. But not many policy leaders realize that our challenge started well before the pandemic. Our data shows that for the last 10 years, Texas has grown high wage jobs at a slower rate than the rest of the United States. Now think about that a minute. We talk endlessly about how we've led the United States in job creation, which is true. But when you look at the percentage of those jobs in high, medium, and low wages, there's a big hole in the middle. We've grown a small number of very high wage jobs, a larger number of very low wage jobs, but not so much in the middle. And therefore, as a percentage, we've grown the living wage jobs less than the nation. That has to become more of a focus to drive this agenda in the future.
So that's a brilliant point, Lee. And maybe as your team thinks about that point, how would you ask us to educate our corporations and then be very pointed in what they need to ask and to whom? I see IBM, and we've also got PwC, and I apologize, I'm not catching everybody that's on the call. We had National Instruments, I believe, and Samsung. Any reaction from you all with big corporations? Is that something that makes sense to you guys, and you all would be willing to support down the road? Because we're trying to be very action oriented with our partners here. Happy to have any comments if anybody's awake enough and willing to comment.
Yep. Ingrid, we will share that slide. I suspect Hans is doing it right now, but two things I would have your members look at is skills-based hiring is not a threat to higher education, but it is a recognition that we have millions of workers who already practice certain skills on the job. They ought to at least be considered for interview. If they have a Google certificate, if they are working on Excel or Salesforce and have for the past 5 or 10 years, there is a national skills-based hiring coalition, and we're going to continue to promote the idea that in order to tap the talents of all Texans, we've got to be more intelligent about our recruitment process. A bachelor's degree in computer science may not have as much relevance to a job in tech as a actual 5 years of experience using a certain digital tool or a certificate in that tool. So that would be something I think that many employers should look at internally in their own processes.
Excellent point. So we will, please jump in if anybody has any questions or commentary. We will absolutely add this slide, and this whole deck will come out to you all. And then also the BCG, which is a consulting company, the report that Lee spoke about earlier. I'm not sure if it made the slide. I think Hans was going to put it up, but you will have access. That's also on their website to be able to look at that. Tricia, is there any other comments or questions? Yeah,
Tracy, this is Sherry Wynn with IBM. Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to jump in and say IBM is very supportive of the space that Lee's talking about, sometimes called middle skills roles. We call them new collar here at IBM. That was a term coined by our former CEO, Jenny Romedy. We have created apprenticeships for non-traditional or job seekers from non-traditional backgrounds or return to work. And this is definitely for the space prior to a 4-year degree, folks with who've been to boot camps or have received certifications. And we even have a platform that we are offering through partnership. It's also available open to learners or job seekers called Skills Build. We are very interested in sharing that with other industries that are hiring, because we know that there are skills gaps in some of their applicants, and we believe that our platform can help with no cost training to fill in some of those skills gaps. So we are very supportive of this space and happy to be aligned with AIM and to be in additional conversations. If anyone's interested, they can reach out to me. Tracy, I believe you're on mute if you're speaking.
Thank you, Sherry. That was excellent, and glad to have IBM and Ginny's leadership from years back still playing forward. So now we're going to move over to Austin. Austin, if you want to load the slides. Austin, I'm sorry, yes, Austin Hall. He is a homegrown Texan. We talk about homegrown talent. He's homegrown Texan, but in Washington, D.C. now, and been a wonderful support with the National STEM Educational Coalition. He will speak to all the federal funding because, you know, his fingers are on the pulse there, how it's rolling out to Texas, and again, you know, how this might evolve where we can be supportive as business leaders.
Yep, thank you, Tracy. Can everybody hear me?
We can see your screen. You may want to, we can also see the slides to the left. So you may want to just blow it up, but we can. Welcome.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, everybody. So I am Austin Hall. I am with the STEM Education Coalition. I'm the Director of Policy here. Based in harmonious Washington, D.C., the STEM Education Coalition is a national coalition made up of about 800 members focused on expanding high quality STEM education opportunities and workforce development in the STEM fields. Our membership includes corporations, your Apples, Microsofts, National Instruments, Raytheons. We also have professional societies, the Society of Women Engineers, the chemists, aviation mechanics, and we also have education groups such as the National Science Teaching Association, Education Development Center, the After School Alliance, many universities and K-12 schools, and STEM specialty schools. So generally, I focus on policy at the federal level, advocating and working with Congress and the various STEM agencies here in Washington to expand STEM education. But we have also started diving into state policy efforts in the last few years, connecting with partners like the STEM ecosystems and after-school networks, and we're in about 23 states now. And it is through this state effort, I was able to connect with Tracy, Tricia, and the Austin STEM ecosystem to talk state policy in Texas. And as Tracy mentioned, I'm a native of. That's right, I am Austin from Dallas. With that, Tracy asked me to provide an overview of federal initiatives that have impacted the field of late, and also to discuss how corporate and ecosystems partners can leverage these opportunities to support STEM education efforts in the Austin community, and also join the chorus of advocates to support their expansion statewide. So the best place to start, of course, is with the federal pandemic relief bills that have been discussed already, which have invested more than $280 billion in K-12 and higher education programs to support the response and recovery of the education system from COVID-19. With the first two packages of funds already entirely obligated, which is the CARES Act and CRSA, I'm going to save some time here and instead focus on the American Rescue Plan, which was enacted earlier this year. So in general, the bill was enacted on March 11th, 2021. In general, it's a size of about $1.9 trillion. It includes $350 billion to state and local governments, which Lewis mentioned has been a huge pot for broadband expansion. And it also includes $130 billion for K through 12 education, $40 billion for higher education. Specific to education, $128 billion of that is for K through 12. And in Texas, that means about $12 billion just in the American Rescue Plan, and about $20 billion when you combine all three packages. As Lewis also mentioned, there's the $7.6 billion for broadband, which is going to be critical, not just for the statewide planning process, but has been critical for expanding subsidies out to families to subscribe to broadband where it is available, which, as we all know, has been a big barrier when it comes to e-learning during the pandemic. So a deeper dive on some of this funding.
Austin, I'm not sure. I see right now just the broad STEM coalition slide. I don't know that it's moving forward. Is everybody else challenged with that too?
Let's see here. What about this?
Now we see it. Okay.
Excellent.
Okay, good.
All right.
Just wanted, you may want to hop back to the last slide real quickly because nobody has it, just so they could see how that tally looked up.
Yep. Do you see that?
We can now.
Okay, great. So here's a little bit of a dive on the funding for education on this previous slide. As I mentioned, Texas is going to receive $12 billion from the American Rescue Plan. About 60% of that has already been obligated. Actually, the plan for spending the rest of it was due yesterday. So I imagine that the TEA has already submitted that and will be up on their website soon. Okay, so a deeper dive on some of this funding. The funds can be used to address the impact of significant and interrupted instruction. Also to upgrade a lot of the infrastructure that health experts have identified as critical for opening schools. Also to purchase education technology. And Congress is pretty particular about set-asides that the state must adopt. Particularly 5% of their state set-aside must be used to address interrupted learning for underserved students, 1% for evidence-based summer programs, and 1% for after-school programs. Also, school districts must set aside at least 20% of their funds to address interrupted learning for underserved students. All of these have a tie back to STEM education, and STEM education can be a use of funds in all of these. Congress intentionally left a lot of flexibility for states and school districts in how they can use this money. And STEM education can be a huge part of that if groups like this one can convince policymakers to take it seriously. So a deeper dive on some of this ARPA funding for STEM specifically. So as one of the call outs, the theme of supporting a well-rounded STEM education. Unfortunately, the pandemic has shortchanged many students of opportunities to experience STEM education in hands-on learning environments. To improve instruction and student engagement in the use in STEM, state and district leaders should ensure that relief funding is used to support the wide range of activities that are specifically allowed in statute to improve STEM teaching and learning. And that includes expansion of high quality STEM courses, support for student participation in STEM nonprofit competitions, increased access to STEM for underserved and at-risk student populations. And this includes informal settings such as after school, museum and sciences, apprenticeships. And, you know, to Lee's point, Texas has traditionally under prioritized career and technical education. And a lot of this relief funding can go to career and technical education. So you're talking about expanding access to apprenticeships, mentorships, and other programs in CTE, in the CTE space. So another aspect is improving assessments of STEM learning. We encourage state and local leaders to use what we call ESSER funds, the K through 12 relief funds, to create or improve math and science assessments so we can understand how students are learning and growing in the STEM fields. One central issue that the pandemic has truly brought to the surface is the need for a fresh approach to the role of accountability systems in the education space, especially as it relates to math and science. So we hope that state and local leaders use this funding to take advantage of that. Another aspect is professional development for STEM educators. Professional learning opportunities are critical to quality teaching, and especially in Texas, teachers need ongoing training in content and pedagogy that is high quality, meaningful, and sustained. They're making significant shifts in their approach to teaching that includes teaching new science standards, integrating teachers that understand computer science into the curriculum, and integrating other academic subjects into STEM. And one of the huge areas that's a focus of the field right now is integrating social emotional learning into the STEM principles. We talk about it as employability skills, but we all know that employers are looking for or having a hard time connecting with workers because they lack the employability skills, such as critical thinking, collaborative thinking, and those types of things. And then one other aspect is recruitment and alternative certification of STEM educators. This is one area where Texas can kind of learn from other states that are doing this well. One result of the pandemic has been a dramatic downturn in the entry of new STEM teachers into the profession and teachers more broadly. And then couple that with the significant attrition in the current STEM teaching ranks. And states can utilize ESSER funds to establish, expand, or improve alternative certification for STEM teachers and provide for differentiated pay and other incentives to recruit and retain teachers in math and science. So what does this mean really for corporate and ecosystem partners? While it was a government effort to make these investments possible and serve as conduits for spending, it really will be a human enterprise to plan how to best spend these investments and make them sustainable to support high quality STEM learning opportunities. And I think the theme of this call is, STEM is, in Texas, we can no longer see STEM as a luxury, but as a necessity. And so state and local education leaders need to hear from groups like the ecosystems and especially industry to understand that there's a drastic need to leverage this once in a lifetime funding to help meet those needs, whether it's in career and technical education, apprenticeships, and these areas more broadly. And one of the best strategies for spending these funds that we're seeing in other states, and there's been some good and bad about how Texas has approached this. They've kind of delayed their distribution of these K-12 funds, which has been rather frustrating for district leaders. But the good part of that is that there's still time to plan and think about how we use these funds. And one of the best ways to do that is for policymakers and community leaders to understand the value of public-private partnerships to make funding more sustainable. And so the question that I would pose to folks on this call is, are there STEM education investments and programs from your company or your program that might fall under this profile that we can identify and share with policymakers when they're thinking about funding? And one thing I'm going to share here in the chat real quick is a link to a letter and a sign-on that we'll talk about here in a minute. But this is one easy way that we can kind of start this process of engaging with policymakers. Sending a letter urging them to see STEM no longer as a luxury, but a necessity. So I'll share these links here. One link is to the letter itself. And then if you support these ideas, which I hope you do in the letter, please do sign on so that we can increase our chorus urging policymakers to take STEM, to understand STEM more as a priority. Okay, and then I'll kind of go through this quickly to spare some time here. So there is a second dose of relief coming that Lewis mentioned earlier, and that is the infrastructure bill. There's still a lot of back and forth over the spending levels and the process for making this bill become law, and whether that's through the reconciliation process or through regular order. Something will get done. It's just a matter of the size and scope. But in general, this has been the proposal and kind of what we're looking at. The Biden proposal is valued at $2.7 trillion. And that's how, this is kind of how this funding breaks down. What's notable is the investments in schools, particularly the school infrastructure, and also in the research and development and manufacturing and job training. This is what will be a notable investment into the WIOA system and into the career and technical education. WIOA is Workforce Investment and Opportunity Fund. So several other STEM research bills that are either circulating in the infrastructure package or can move on their own here in Washington that might be of note are the Endless Frontiers Act, which is a massive boost to NSF funding and investments in technology regional hubs for public-private partnerships. That's actually on the floor this week and could pass the Senate this week. And then we have the Inspires Act, the Restart Act, the STEM Ecosystems Act by Senator Mark Kelly, involving state and local STEM organizations in ARPA and ESSA planning. That could be critical if it does get through on the infrastructure package. And then, like I mentioned, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which I'm sure Lee and Hans are going to be paying pretty close attention to, as the objectives of the bill will be to better align the data and programmatic aspects of the workforce development, career and technical education in both K through 12 and higher education systems at the federal level, so that states and localities also have coordinated systems for data reporting and implementation. And one more bit here on the Endless Frontiers Act. It's a bipartisan bill by Senator Schumer, the majority leader, and Senator Todd Young from Indiana. It would increase NSF, the National Science Foundation's authorized funding level, and expand their role in supporting public-private partnerships. In particular, there's a focus on expanding rural STEM education and computer science education. So hopefully that bill gets to the Senate and is addressed in the House. And with that, I don't want to take any more time, so I'm going to go ahead and stop there. Tracy?
Thanks, Austin. I guess the two high-level nets is there is a ton of money coming our way. I think we've heard it once in a lifetime investment several times over, and trying to orchestrate that is going to be critical so that STEM out of school, you know, all of these priority topics lead to the efforts that we need, which for our corporations, it's to have homegrown talent here. So we have a little section. Trish, will you put up the agenda again real quickly? And while she does that, any questions on federal funding or for any of our speakers so far? Okay, what we're going to do is run through real quickly. It's been alluded to in several occasions, specific activities that are evolving, maybe that you can engage in short term, and then open for any other discussion. So Austin spoke to the fact that he put together on our behalf a letter to Texas policymakers. I believe it's in the chat now. It's very pointed. It does cover that we think they need to be considering funding very specific guidelines for STEM and for out of school. 80, I think the right number, Jenna can correct me, is 80% of the learning happens out of school. So let's make sure that doesn't happen in a separate activity versus in partnership with our school districts. That is in play now, and we hope that there will be more of these opportunities that will make it very easy for you all as corporate members to speak out. And we also shared several that came from Texas 2036 earlier this year. I would assume if AIM and Lee, Chris and Hans have you know, letters they want us to put out or would like the corporations to come on, we will share those and illuminate those. Austin, any other comments on that letter to Texas? Because then I'll just hand it over to Luis, if not.
Yeah, the only other comment I mentioned is that the special session and the fact that there's been a delay in some of the disbursements of these federal funds allows for a little bit longer timeline than pretty much any other state to kind of reach lawmakers and influence them. But regardless of the federal funds or not, I think it's just important for policymakers to understand the overall theme that we have to see STEM education as a necessity.
Thank you. That is our call to action. It's no longer a luxury. It is a necessity and a piece of the pie. Lewis, great work is being done with the Future Tech Commission and Margaret Spelling. Can you make us aware of that for right now? I know it's just kicked off recently and a lot more activity will come to that.
Sure. So just a little high-level overview. The Future of Tech Commission is a commission that was started by Secretary Margaret Spellings, our boss, founder and CEO. I mean, not founder. It's a CEO and president here at Texas 2036, and Jim Steyer, who's the founder and CEO of Common Sense Media, and former Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick. And so, out of conversations with the White House and the FCC chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel, they created this commission to advise the Biden and Harris administration on a technology policy as we're moving more towards a digital society. We feel like there needs to be some type of comprehensive technology policy agenda put forward. We're focusing on 5 areas. One of them is promoting digital equity. Second area is protecting safety and health on online platforms. Our third area is ensuring consumer privacy. Fourth area is fostering market competition among technology companies. And our fifth area is advancing innovation in all sectors in our society. So one of the big action items that we have here is collecting information from Texans such as yourself in terms of what feedback and what policies are needed at the federal level to ensure that we are keeping up with technology. And so I'm putting into the chat a survey that we're collecting that's going to roll up into our commission. The outcome of this commission is to produce a policy blueprint that will turn over to the Biden and Harris administration on a starting point for a comprehensive technology policy. Some of the objectives or some of the action items that we're doing is collecting information such as a survey, and we're also doing town halls all across the country on these areas. Our town halls can be viewed on our website, and I'm putting that also into the chat. And you can see a list of different town halls that we'll be having. But with that, I would encourage you all to fill out that survey and then just check out some of the town halls that we'll be having. There's one tomorrow that's going to be in Southern California, based in Southern California. And I think they're going to be talking about online platform accountability in a healthy online space. So turn it back over to you, Tracy.
Sorry, thanks, Lewis. And another key thread that ties back to STEM. I mean, technology and innovation are not going away and we need to leverage them. So lastly, I'd like to introduce Jenna Courtney. Jenna leads Text Post, which is the partnership for out of school time, for those of you who may not know that acronym. And Jenna's going to speak a little bit about her efforts with the legislature and the ESSER funding we heard about earlier.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tracy. And thanks everybody for including me today. Really a wonderful conversation. Like Tracy just said, 80% of a kid's time is spent outside of school. And so that really grounds our mission at Text Post to be providing opportunities for kids, particularly those kids who might have inequitable access to other opportunities or who might not learn in a traditional school setting, to make sure that every kid in Texas has access to out of school time in an equitable manner. And quite frankly, to move things forward and close gaps that exist elsewhere in a kid's life. And so everything that we've talked about today is really core to our work. Y'all noticed when Austin was walking through the federal legislation, there are some call outs for out of school time, after school and summer learning quite explicitly. And we turn to STEM frequently to use as our example of what really effective, enriching out of school learning opportunities can look like. STEM is such a fantastic example of what kinds of hands-on applied learning can happen in that more informal space. And so it's really one of the things that we love to lift up as an opportunity for kids to learn not only how to do those things, but then to apply them in practical applications, which I think is so important for the workforce parts of these conversations. And so what we've been talking about, as has been said repeatedly, is the importance of re-engaging kids in this time, closing all of the gaps that existed before the pandemic that have just been exacerbated throughout the pandemic, and coordinating to leverage investing in every possible resource that we have, which very importantly includes the school day, but does not only include the school day, in order to get kids fully recovered, holistically recovered from the pandemic, and also prepared for a successful life and work opportunities in the future, which is obviously so important to this group, right? And doing all of the things that we've talked about in terms of workforce development. Lee, you did an incredible job of outlining all of the ways that we weren't doing a great job of that in Texas before the pandemic, and it's only gotten worse. And so we really, we agree, we share that mission. And so we are also looking at advocating to school districts, to policymakers about how to invest the resources that we have in this once in a lifetime opportunity to really make a difference in kids' lives and close a lot of these gaps and do it in a way that can be sustainable beyond the federal investment of the next couple of years. And so I do want to highlight specifically what our call to action has been. Obviously, after school and summer can happen just about anywhere. Those learning opportunities happen at schools, happen at Boys and Girls Clubs, happen at museums, happen with parks departments across cities and across the country. We think that investing in all of those partnering organizations, in addition to and in partnership with school districts, is really an important part of the path forward on recovery, in that we absolutely want to be aligned with school districts, but putting all of the money into that one place is not going to get a holistic recovery that can reach every single kid. And so we think that the community partnership part of it is incredibly important, to be creating as many opportunities as we can. Again, STEM, a huge part of that development. And so Tracy, you and I have talked about this, I'll leave it here. We really are working on, as an organization, deepening our relationships in workforce development and corporate relationships, because I think that y'all are incredible advocates for the kinds of things that we need. And sometimes that is better received and more well listened to by policymakers from someone who is not running a nonprofit that wants to support after school. Having you say how important our role is in a broader ecosystem of support for kids goes a lot further than if I say it by myself. And so we're trying to do more of that work in relationship building. And I will toss my email in the chat and would love to talk with absolutely everyone in this meeting about what that can mean more specifically. But we're so excited about this opportunity and really hoping that we can push forward to help kids and families and accomplish a lot of the goals that have already been outlined today.
Yeah, thank you so much, and eloquently said about connecting all these dots. We have covered an incredible amount of information. And by the way, I saw the slides, I organized this in prep, and I'm still reeling with all the data that came. Great data that came. So there's a lot that we can do to coordinate our efforts. There are a lot more corporate players we need to get involved. Not only the community engagement people, but the ones who are managing the policy, the HR leadership, all of this has to come together. So as you think about who you know, and we need to put that list together about how to get more people to these forums to A, get educated, and then B, to come up with a collective voice. Now, there is no doubt STEM is organized today's actual conversation. STEM is top of mind with our list. But like I said, when I started this conversation, we realized right off the bat, it's a building block. Broadband was the most critical, and then we have to work our way up. And if we can have that collective voice, Jenna and I exchanged emails. You know, the nonprofits out here only get so much of a head nod. Wear the goody two shoes, you know, in it for everybody. But having worn my corporate hat for over 36 years, that's where some of the real voices can come and will be listened to. So any other questions or comments before we close? I think we need to have more forums like this. I'm going to advocate that we probably maybe don't wait till August and try to get back together and stay very much in line and in tune to what's happening with Luis's Texas 2036's help and AIM's help.
Gonna remind people, I'll go back to our save the date. We have our next corporate convening scheduled for August 11th. So make sure you mark your calendar for that. If you want to receive reminders about it, the easiest way I have found is just to go ahead and sign up in Eventbrite, and it will automatically send you some reminders as we get close to that date. So feel free to head to our ecosystem website to do that. And don't forget, we also have our community-wide events, the July 29th STEM Professional Development Day, as well as our October 21st Networking Forum that we will also be reminding people as we near those. We'll aim to send the slides out and the recording hopefully tomorrow, and any other resources, as well as I'll grab the stuff from the chat that was shared and the resources that were shared there, so you have all of it in one place. So you can look for that hopefully tomorrow, assuming I can get it all up on our YouTube channel by then. Thank you, everybody.